Yeah, I think the psychologists begin to understand that so much of our thinking depends on our body and our tools.
Yeah.
That to a person holding a hammer, everything is a nail. That the only action you can imagine with a hammer is striking, so
Yeah.
everything you strike.
Yeah.
You don't do like anything else with
Yeah.
it. And I think this becomes very clear in the 60s when we come up with cognitive psychology,
Yeah.
which is the model that our brains act as computers, to put
Yeah.
it very simply. And the idea is that there's an input, then there's a processing, and there's an output. Now, this model comes literally a few years after we invent a computer. It's
Yeah.
not a
So
coincidence.
I have a book which says why our conception of brain keeps changing with technology. So brain first was like a compass. When we had invented compass, then became a calculator, then it became a computer, and now people are saying it's like an LLM and so on. So the technologies we have that exhibit any amount of,
Beautiful.
we project that into what brain might be.
Damn. Oh, I kept thinking LLM was a regression because at least the cognitive model said कि दिमाग में जो जा रहा है वो black box है बेटा कैसे process हो रहा है हमें नहीं पता
Yeah.
कुछ हो रहा है LLM कह रहा है it's a predictive text model
Yeah.
which is what the behaviorists were talking about in the 50s.
Yeah.
B.F. Skinner's entire model of language was this
Yeah.
that a kid says mama दूध mama gives दूध the kid is like mama दूध बोलेंगे तो दूध मिलेगा
Yeah.
कि लैंग्वेज आदमी सीखता है ऐसे है कि एक एक्शन उसका रिस्पॉन्स आ गया फीडबैक लूप कंप्लीट हो गया अब वो सीख गया एंड देन दैट गॉट ब्रोकन बाय नोम चोम्स्की एंड सच बट
But Noam Chomsky said LLM should not be possible. The whole thing was about systemizing classes of grammar, but it's,
he know
in the modern context, it's not true anymore.
but Chomsky
You
said
can throw anything into transformers and they learn it.
Chomsky said specifically about modern LLMs or he said the LLM based method of learning for kids is not possible.
I think if I recall correctly, and I might be wrong, his sense was that language follows,
Universal basic grammar.
universal basic grammar.
Right.
And I think that pushed a lot of early NLP research into building very symbolic kind of programs where if you remember, it's like verb should come before this and so on and so forth.
Right.
But
So they try to
don't
like
have to program anything in LLMs. They just end up picking these abstractions themselves.
huh.
And so
what
in that sense, very empirical instead of very theory driven.
What Chomsky said in response to Skinner was the father of psychology back then. He gave the idea that language is learned through behavior, that there is no inherent meaning to words. You just say mouthly sounds and things happen and you associate them together. Chomsky said if that was the case, then there would be no ability in a child to make infinite sentences. Because child ने सीखा मम्मा दूध, उसने नहीं सीखा दूध मम्मा दूध दे दो, मम्मा प्लीज दूध दे दो. He didn't learn all of those things, right? So he would only be able to say mama दूध. And that broke Skinner's idea, and then Chomsky went on later, 20, 30 years later, to study language psycholinguists and figured out all languages have a common pattern, which he conceptualized as UBG, Universal Basic Grammar.
So with languages, again, they serve an evolutionary purpose of two things. One is getting information across in a noisy channel. So when I and you communicate, I want you to understand what I'm saying. But there's also an efficiency constraint where I want to not spend too much energy because everything in evolution is about conserving energy. So in that sense, I mean, if you notice, why are the most spoken words the simplest? Mama, papa, mom, dad, pani. And because the more frequently the words are, the shorter they are, the easy to pronounce they are, they require less energy. But you can't keep on doing this because ultimately, if too many things sound similar to mama, papa, pani the other person will have to spend more energy trying to understand. So there is this beautiful power law where I think it's called Zipf's law, where if you put that up, it's very interesting, where in most like if you see on the top right, the most common words are spoken a lot more than the rarer words, and they're also the simplest.
So common words.
So in that sense, when you're saying the child learned a sentence to communicate, I think it's the most compressed representation of the idea I want to come across. And the mother would have understood it even if one verb was here and there. And that's why most languages don't follow exactly the same structure, right? In fact, there was a study also. A lot of us believe when people, let's say some communities in US end up tweaking English in their own way, like I don't do nothing.
Ebonics.
Yeah.
It's called Ebonics, right?
So in that sense, some people, some researchers that studied when you modify this language, even Gen Z starts using language in a very different way. And you say that, as maybe that this is wrong, this is not correct language and so on. But what is correct language? If once researchers study the context in which that how language has evolving, the new kind of language, it also represents the same efficiency and information fidelity constraints that we talked about. So internally, that modified grammar makes more sense. So whenever language changes a little bit, it gets adopted. So adoption of language is a proof in itself that you have improved language.
Improved, sure. It's
like you're communicating more, either more with higher fidelity or with more efficiency. So there's no such thing as wrong language in that sense if it's widely adopted.
I feel like there's no wrong language, sure. I'm not sure if all improvements on language are a fidelity improvement. Sometimes there's stylized improvements that could actually be more costly.
But if it's stylized, you have to see that it's probably communicating something of value which was not getting communicated. Maybe it's communicating I'm part of this member. I'm part of this clan and you're not.
Yeah. That's what tattoos
and that's a lot of value.
Sure. I'm not. I understand what you mean. That signaling also, the secondary signaling also part of the word. When I say sus, it's not just that I'm saying suspicious. I'm also saying I'm suspicious, but as a younger person.
Yeah.
And there is value to that. I understand what you're saying. You know what I found very interesting about languages is Hebrew as its modern spoken form in Israel. Yeah, Hebrew as its modern spoken form in Israel was the language of the Bible.
Okay.
But when Israel was formed, they did not want to carry their earlier languages, be that German or Yiddish, or some of them were speaking Austrian, some stuff like that. They said, we will now take up the language of our scripture and make it real. Almost as if India saying in 47, we'll make Sanskrit our language, right? But that language is 5,000 years old. You don't have any modern words for it.
Yeah.
And so they get about thinking, okay, how do we have modern words for it? First, they took two scholars, if I remember the story correctly. They're like, एक काम करो, घर जाओ, और ये जितने भी modern words है ना, इनके नए words बना के लाओ.
Okay.
So I think it was tomato or potato, which was a word that did not exist in Hebrew. And these two camps are decidedly against each other. कि इसको हम ये बोलेंगे versus ये बोलेंगे. तो दंगे हो गए, लड़ाई पिटाई हो गई. And eventually these guys realized, nahin, it's not us older people who will decide what the language will be. It'll be the younger people. And they gave, when the fidget spinner came, Israel distributed a form in schools saying, what should we call it?
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
Blew my mind. I was like, this is so interesting. Israel, as opposed to India, is a country of young people.
Yeah.
Because when Ben Gurion and his friends reached the coast of Tel Aviv, then it was not Tel Aviv. And when they set up their first community and then the country in the same land, which is now modern Israel, they were 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
The national myths of Israel will scare you because it's a bunch of 20-year-olds. It's not Mahatma Gandhi at like post-60 celibacy. It's dangerous territory. So it's a country of young people.
Yeah.
That's what's
Makes
very different
sense.
about them.
Yeah.
Even if you go into their Iron Dome camps, I think earlier or maybe even still, some of those rockets are operated on Xbox remotes by young people.
Really?
Who are very good at video games.
Wow.
Insane. My trip to Israel was fascinating because we saw all these like tiny little things that people do not see. Only special access would get you.
So fascinating.
I know.
Yeah.
We were standing at the edge of the Golan Heights, which used to be in Syria before Israel took it over, inside a military bunker.
How did you get access to all this?
Well, there's something called a Hillel Center, which is like a Jewish interest center at universities. So there was a Hillel Center at Columbia who used to take a trip for Americans.
Okay.
They would not take an Indian generally. But I charmed my way through. I convinced them. I said, listen, I want to see what your country is like.
Yeah.
And they charge a nominal fee, $500, to give us a geopolitical tour of the land.
Oh, that's so cool, yeah.
So everything from flights to hotels to tours, everything. We are meeting Mossad agents. We are meeting Palestinian pollsters. We are meeting families inside the West Bank. We were at the edge of Gaza. It's like complete novel exposure to a land which is so unique in its way. Like being inside a Palestinian home felt so much like being inside a home in like Jangpura.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like as someone who's maybe born in that area, either Palestine, Gaza or Israel, I mean, how stressful it would be. Like, I mean, the more I think about it, the more I feel like there are no truths. lot of people when this war happened and started, a lot of people started taking sides.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what side should I be in? And the more I think about it, the more I felt both are wrong, both are right in some senses. And it just makes you question.
In all fairness, be against the British. Looking at the Israel-Palestine problem made me realize, bro, it's those guys, man. Those guys were horrible people. Why would you divide a country in 3 and give 2 parts to one and 1 to the other? They did it in India. They did it in Israel. Same pattern. The British are the problem. And I feel like we have such historical amnesia. We don't blame them enough. What's wrong with us?
Yeah.
They fought the polity of billions of people just because they were like, oh, we don't have money to, carry these kingdoms anymore. There is no reason for East Pakistan and West Pakistan.
Yeah.
There's no reason for Gaza and Palestine.
Yeah.
Oh, for West Bank. Like, there is just no reason. Or whatever. It's a very heartbreaking story.
It just shows you path dependence of today's reality. Like it doesn't have to make sense. It's just like a series of historical accidents.
You have to explain path dependence.
Path dependence just means things could have been just way different.
Yeah.
Way different. And the truths we think about, the balance of the world we see today might have been just completely different had a few things been different.
Mm-hmm. Like if Hitler was accepted to art school.
Yeah.
That's a common joke.
Yeah, or maybe if Germany had gotten to making atom bombs first. Or maybe if Britishers put more thought before dividing the countries. There's so many things. Maybe, let's say gunpowder was invented earlier, or some Indian ruler were more aggressive towards expansion. Like just so many different things.
The what ifs.
Yeah, the history could have unfolded so differently. That's why I find the grand narratives, I used to like them in my 20s. Things like people who explained why the world
is the way it is.
Has to be the way it is. I remember reading this book, Guns, Germs and Steel, where there's beautiful theories on why Europe dominated, of latitude. Like they had like a luxury of the same crop growing at a lot larger land and so on.
Oh, hold up. First, can you move this a little closer? I'm sorry, it's a little loose today.
Yeah.
But wait, what is this book about?
I think Guns, Germs and Steel explained why Europe dominated.
Okay.
And I remember the main crux was because Europe is more wider. So the same crop grows in a much bigger land versus let's say America. America has more number of latitudes.
So there's no uniformity in agriculture.
So there's no so there was never an abundance of calories. So in Europe there was a lot of abundance in calories. But my point is, so that gave them a head start. But my point is I used to love these ideas, but now I feel there is so much of what ifs in the world, so much of random accidents that these are post hoc rationalizations.
I agree. I feel like the purpose of these things.
And same thing with, for example, Sapiens. I think
Sure.
I liked the book when I had read first, but now I feel just super simplistic view of how things are.
The reason I studied psychology is because I liked evolution as a first principles way of thinking of why the world is the way it is. Like the same thing. And I agree, as you acquire more experience, as details emerge further, you realize the complexity is so much greater than how things were modeled in my erstwhile, musings. And I think the benefit of this is not that you get accurate. The map is never the territory. You and I agreed firsthand, right? I think the benefit is you get into the habit of modeling sharper and sharper and sharper and sharper. Like never take a theory too seriously, especially of a social nature, especially of a psychological nature, especially that talks about history and the way paths have formed.
Yeah.
But I feel like I had my beef with Osho when I started listening to him first. And then I remember there was a convincer, probably one of the last convincers before I was like, hell yeah, he's my guy. When I heard him say, he said, I talk in this flowery language about all these ideas, knowing you would do nothing after you've listened to this.
Yeah.
The point of this is not to convince you. The point of this is to pass on an effervescence, a sweet smell that makes you want to sit near me. And once you start sitting amongst people who want the best for themselves, you will slowly start falling into your own self. And so the idea that intellectual entertainment, as entertaining as it might be, is a way for people to begin thinking about deeper things, whatever might be their personal deeper things.
Yeah.
It just is the bait.
No, of course, I think it's a great starting point.
Yeah.
But one shouldn't stop there.
Right.
I mean, in that sense, again, I mean, the whole thing of if you roll back clock in evolution's history, it's very likely intelligence may not even evolve.
Again.
Yeah.
It's
And
probably more likely than not.
Yeah, because I mean, our natural instinct is to think there is like a leveling up that happens and we are at the top of the species. But evolution is all about how can you be very efficient in terms of proliferation. And in a lot of senses, bacteria is much more efficient at that. And all the organisms make this trade-off of how much I'm investing versus what I'm getting back. It's an ROI.
Yeah, it's an ROI thing, yes.
And intelligence takes a lot of calories. Intelligence takes a lot of investment. And in
it's not clear why.
Historical circumstance could have been that this path of evolution never would have gotten explored or exploited. And this probably also explains why we don't find intelligence out there in the universe.
It's very possible.
It's very likely. I mean, my belief is that life is very, very likely and it's spread at a lot of places across the universe. But intelligence is probably very, very rare because there is a trade-off. For intelligence, you require a lot of energy investment. And it can happen through historical accident, but most paths wouldn't explore that because it just requires a lot of investment.
Sure. Bro, अगर ये सुन के आपको मजा आया किसी भी एंड तक, अगर आप यहाँ तक देख रहे हो तो मजा आया ही, ठीक है? अपने आप से बात मत करो फालतू की. एक काम करो, सब्सक्राइब. Trust me.